This is a level 1 training that we are doing currently, and we have another level 2 that is planned in person. More details will come at the end of the session. And so my presentation is going to be pretty cursory in the way I have structured it. And my responsibility is to unpack the idea of logical thinking. I'm titling it as the good, bad, or the ugly. Logical thinking, many people say, is not for Christians. They say faithful Christians need not use logic or reason, and that they really need to only focus on faith. I'm going to ask you all to now brace yourselves. Let's keep this a little light and interactive. I'm going to ask you a few questions, and don't get nervous, not difficult questions. The first question that I want us to think as I want to unpack this idea of logical thinking, good, bad, or ugly, is, can God make a rock that is so big that he cannot lift? Now, many of you would have already heard this question, and many of you might be, raring to give the right answer. But it's an interesting question for us to, can God make a rock so big that he cannot lift? Now I see someone saying yes, the others saying no, and half of us are wondering and confused. Let's look at the next question. I'm not going to give it away so early in the presentation. Can God make a square circle? Can our omnipotent God, all-powerful God, make a square circle? And again, some of us want to say yes, and some of us are saying no, and some of us perhaps are waiting to see, what the majority is and go with the flow. Interesting questions, aren't they? Right. Let's look at another one. The next question: if a liar told you that he was one, would you believe him? If a liar were to tell you that he was one, would you believe him? Someone's saying maybe, someone's saying no, someone's saying yes, and it's very interesting. I want you to take time and think deep through the question. Let's look at another one. What does the invisible man look like? The next slide. What does the invisible man look like? That's in the next slide. Okay. Some of you are wondering, what does the invisible man look like? Perhaps he looks invisible. That's how he looks like. Whichever way you answer these questions, some of us might be tempted to say a yes or a no, or give a very quick answer and blurt out something that immediately comes to our mind. But if we really were to sit down and look and stare at the question a little more deeply, it'll become increasingly evident that these are questions that just cannot be answered one way or the other, right? So people ask us questions all the time, like Bala was saying. Apologetics is a defense of the faith. We defend the faith, we commend the faith, and we're supposed to translate the faith. But when we try to do all of that, it is inevitable that people will ask us questions. We cannot be giving them verse after verse from the Bible. We are to journey with them, intellectually, which is the place that they perhaps are, and walk them to the scriptures so that the scriptures actually become a lot more meaningful and enjoyable and winsome as they see it. Okay. Some of you might have come across this question. The next slide. How can God be both 3 and 1? A very famous one, a very popular one. All the time in evangelism, especially with our Islamic brothers, we are asked this, right? The next one is, how do you know that the Bible is God's word? The next one is, how do you know that Jesus rose from the dead? Now, all of these questions are questions that deserve worthy answers because they are good questions. They're very thought out questions, and the person that is asking from the other side is not necessarily trying to, burst the bubble or poke a hole in your argument. They deserve to have an answer. Now, our intention this night is not try to figure out how to answer these questions. I just use these sets of questions to help us to understand that as we articulate our Christian faith, especially, as we are striving to use apologetics and evangelism, it is inevitable that we will be in a place where we have to answer questions, right? And when we answer questions, we are supposed to start employing our mind and thought to the question. Okay. Now, if I pause for about half a minute, can the admin mute everybody and perhaps just unmute me and selectively unmute others later on when the session is over, please? Let's do that so that we don't get distracted. Thank you so much. Yes. Let's look at the next slide. It's an interesting slide, and I want you to think. The next slide. Look at this. There are two buttons there. One is a blue button and the other is a red button. And I want you to look at both of these together and not separately. Now, the blue button says that the red button is false, but the red button says the blue button is true. Now, my question is, how do we figure out and find out and reconcile? And is it possible that both of the buttons are true at the same time in the same sense? Okay, one button is saying the other button is false, but the other button is saying it is true. And so what it attests is the red button is saying that what the blue button says, okay, is as false is actually true, which means that the red button is not true. Okay, so it's something. As we try to process, we realize that we are in front of a problem that is beginning to evolve and emerge and loom large. Okay, so we come back to logic and thinking at this point. Now, we can be very, very faith-filled Christians, but whether we like it or not, in everyday living, we have to employ our intellect and our mind to be able to figure things out, to be able to grapple things, to be able to work responses, to be able to solve issues. And it can be a red button, blue button issue. But only that it will be presented in a different format as a different question. I have a little poem for you in the next slide that we're going to look at, and it might help for you to perhaps close your eyes and listen to this. This is the poem. The slide does not show that, but just listen to this. It's called A Summer Night, and it was written by Nathan Alterman. And this is how it goes. One sunny day in the middle of the night, two dead boys got into a fight. Back to back, they faced each other, pulled out sabers, and shot one another. A deaf policeman heard the noise and came and killed those two dead boys. For those of you who could concentrate, you must be chuckling under your breath, because this poem is full of opposites. One sunny day in the middle of the night, two dead boys got into a fight. Back to back, they face each other. They pull out swords and they shoot one another. A deaf policeman hears the noise and came and killed those two dead boys. Now, without having to go to a school of philosophy on first hearing, Most of us would have spotted that these are statements that seem so meaningless because they are nullifying each other and they are opposing each other and they are saying opposite things. The claims are opposite to one another. And so I want to present to you at this point, in the next slide, that we are all capable of thinking. And I have a little test for you. You have to read this in yellow for me under your breath, of course. You better believe it. Your brain is clever. Just try and see if you can read this. Most likely you can. This is because the mind does not read all letters, only the word as a whole, according to research at Cambridge University. It's all jumbled up, but somehow our mind has this amazing ability to process, through all of the errors, the right idea that is being conveyed. Now, what's the bottom line? The bottom line, all this to say that we are demanded every day to think, that we are wired to think, and that we are wired to think for the most part in non-contradictory ways, right? Let's look at the next slide. Why do I say that? Is there a reason why I say that? From the biblical worldview, the verse that I would like to use for this is Genesis 1:26, that speaks about God choosing to create mankind in his own image and likeness. Now, you might have heard this verse several times, but perhaps some of you did not have the opportunity to pause and ponder about what this idea of image and likeness actually means. The idea of image and likeness is not 2 hands and 2 feet and 1 face and 2 eyes and 1 nose and 1 mouth and 2 ears. There's something that is far more beyond that we will look in the next slide. Okay, the idea of the image of God captures, as Nick Tavani, one of the RTB scholar community members, categorizes in 3 views. He says one is the resemblance view, the other is the relational view, and the third is the representative view. We're not going into details of all of that. Let me just pick up something from the resemblance view. Now, how do we as humans resemble God if we are not physically resembling him? Because we know that God is spirit. Well, we are resembling him in ways that are spiritual. God is spirit, and we are spiritual beings at our core. God is rational. That is the important thrust of this particular session. And so he makes us the crowning glory of this creation as rational beings. Now, God is moral. And when Dr. Rajkumar was praying at the beginning, he said, our conscience is corrupted, but we still do have a conscience that tells us what is right and what is wrong, even before somebody came and taught us what is right and wrong. So we are moral. We are creative. In that sense, we are creational. If God is a creator with a capital C, we are all creators in some small sense, doing our own acts of creativity in different spheres of life. If God is aesthetic, okay, now there is the sense of desire for beauty and aesthetics in us, and how we naturally, rather supernaturally, are wired to appreciate it. So when we look at ourselves, okay, we find that we are made in the image and likeness of God. And what does that mean? It means, more importantly for this session, that we are rational beings. Of course, there are errors of thinking that we commit from time to time because our rationality is affected by the fall. And we are all in the process of working towards having our minds transformed to be like the mind of Christ. All that to say that intuitively, in the Creator's design, We are hardwired to be able to think reasonably, to be able to think rationally, to be able to think in non-contradictory ways, and to be able to think meaningfully for the most part. And so I'm trying to help us establish and understand that as Christians, if we worship and believe that our Creator is rational and that He created us in His image and likeness, then by default, we ought to be people that use our minds in rational ways, especially when it comes to loving and living for God. Let's move to the next slide. How are we to love God? When somebody came and asked Jesus, how am I to love God? Is there a way for me to understand? Can you cut down all the clutter, 613 laws, and let me know, how best I can love God? He says, we can love God in a very holistic, rounded way. I love this verse in Mark chapter 12, verse 30. I think Bala made a reference to it in his presentation also. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Wow, that's interesting. I'm not here going into dissecting the heart and soul and mind and strength and get into a debate here. All of these words in yellow capture the several layers and nuances of human personhood, right? So don't ask me where does the heart start and where does the soul stop and what exactly is the mind and so on and so forth. We can do that another day. But the idea that Jesus is communicating here is love God in a holistic way. Now, heart is believed to be the seat of emotions. So we ought to love God with our emotions. And that's sometimes what we do when we tear up in worship. When we are so joy-filled in the Lord's presence, we are expressing a love for God through emotions. Soul is believed to be the seat of decisions or the seat of will. Now, if you say, I will attend the second day of Reasons Academy tomorrow and I want to learn more, what are you doing? You are actually making a decision using the seat of your will, which is your soul. And if you're committed to actually keeping that promise, you would have definitely loved the Lord with your soul. Now, that's a nice way to market for you to come tomorrow for the session. Okay. Jokes apart, loving the Lord with our strength means loving Him with our physical capabilities. Now, we've been blessed, most of us have been blessed with bodies that are able and strong. And when a fellow brother or even anybody else is in need, we are at the end of a long day, we are dead tired, we just want to hit the sack, but then we push ourselves to go and do acts of kindness and service. That's loving the Lord with our strength. Now, all of us do most of these things very, very well, but you know what we all struggle with as a large Christian community, and that's the reason for apologetics ministry to again and again come in this space where Christians could be empowered, is to love the Lord with your mind. So somehow we have a feeling that faith and the intellect, the faith and the mind are opposed to each other and that they cannot coexist and that they are enemies. Not so at all, because Jesus tells that He wants us to love the Lord with our intellect, right? And so let's move to the next slide. If we are to love the Lord in a holistic fashion, we ought to love Him with our emotions, right? The next slide. We ought to love Him with our decision-making capacity, yes or no, choose this or that, right or wrong, decide and do, right? And we ought to love the Lord in the next slide with our physicality. and our physical capabilities, acts of service, and more importantly, we ought to love the Lord with our minds. But many of us said, hey, never mind about mind. But Lord Jesus very clearly and emphatically says, we don't have a choice. It's very interesting that in Eastern tradition, especially Hinduism, there are three ways to salvation, right? There is this bhakti marg, which is devotion unto God, something similar to loving the Lord with your heart. There is karma marg, which is doing acts of good deeds, karma, and then use that as a road to salvation. And there is this Gyan marg, which is using our intellect to attain salvation. And they can choose any one of these three in Hinduism, and they can, according to them, reach enlightenment or salvation or nirvana. But here Jesus says, hey, there's no pick and choose, mix and match game here. All of us are to love the Lord maximally with all our faculties. So some of us are naturally drawn to love the Lord with our intellect. Okay, and that's why we've been doing apologetics, and the others of you are wondering, what on earth are you guys doing? And but some of us, the majority of us, are drawn to love the Lord emotionally. The first few opening notes of a worship song, I know for a fact that there are many sisters that are watching who would immediately tear up. Now, somebody has to hit me black and blue, for me to shed a tear. So all of us are differently wired, but then I won't say this is my specialty, but I would say I'm not good in, emotionally loving the Lord or volitionally with my decisions loving the Lord. And so I'm going to grow in that area so that I would become a holistic, rounded disciple. If you look at the majority of the church today, sadly to say, many of us are not loving the Lord with our mind. And that's the reason why we are, in fact, even organizing this at three different levels so that the church would become a body of thinkers. Not very long ago, during the time of Renaissance, every is actually an exaggeration. Most of the ones who invented and discovered and created works of art, be it in architecture or be it in painting or sculpting or music, was essentially coming from a biblical worldview. And so we were thought leaders, perhaps about 400, 500 years ago. But today, if you look at the Christian community, there is so much of sensationalism and fideism, which is faith in faith. And so we have totally lost reason and the value of reason. And so this is what Jesus is actually, encouraging us to do. The next slide, please. Many of us would be Christians that ask for, scriptural verses to validate what we say. Here's a big one in Isaiah 1:18 that says, "Come now, let us reason together," says the Lord. Now, I told you that the Lord is rational. The Lord is a Lord who reasons, and he invites us, people that are made in his image and likeness, that bear the mark of his rationality, to come and sit and reason, with him, like, two people would sit and reason across the table. But some of you are asking, but what about some other scriptures that so clearly, in the next slide, seem to be speaking against the use of reason? What about 1 Corinthians 1:20 that says, "Where is the wise person? Where is the teacher of the law? Where is the philosopher of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world?" And then again, next slide, 1 Corinthians 2:2-5, where, "For I resolved to know nothing while I was with you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. I came to you in weakness with great fear and trembling. My message and my preaching were not with wise and persuasive words," Brother Charles, like you're using this morning, this evening, but with a demonstration of the Spirit's power, so that your faith may not rest on human wisdom, but on God's power. And so we read verses like this, and we think that if we are to be truly spiritual, really spiritual, intensely spiritual, somehow we have to switch off, the upstairs, as it were. And no wonder the atheists on the outside are looking at us and heckling us as a bunch of people that have committed intellectual suicide, and as a bunch of people that have blind faith and pick us and mock us, as a community, using the various memes that you see all over social media. So it's important for us to understand that what Paul is saying here is only speaking against human wisdom. In all of the verses that I cited, all three verses from 1 Corinthians, he's speaking about a carnal, a banal, human level of wisdom, which is very different, which is the wisdom of the world. But as James would later on say and show us the distinction between godly wisdom and human, or he calls it demonic wisdom, we are people who are blessed with this, mind that can think so beautifully and non-contradictorily, because that is a fingerprint of our God on us, attesting and endorsing that we are made in his image and likeness. And so we are to operate with divine wisdom. And so to be able to use our God-given minds in for God-given purposes, Christ-exalting purposes, is actually something that the Bible recommends us to do, right? And let's go to the next slide. So that brings us, the next slide, please, to what is philosophy? Okay, I will not be going through it in a very deep way. We would cover all of this in our level 2, session, which is a residential session that we are planning, the details of which you will know at the end of this seminar during the announcements time. But it's a very cursory knowledge of philosophy and what it is important for us to know. So what is philosophy? The word Sophia means wisdom. Now, when I said Sophia, some of you are thinking about, that friend of yours in church, your next door neighbor. No, Sophia is not that girl. The word Sophia means wisdom, and philein or phileo is a word for love. So anybody who loves wisdom, not the human wisdom. In Proverbs chapter 8, Jesus, scholars say, is wisdom personified. And so if you are somebody who have a love for wisdom, or who wants to develop a love for wisdom, what you are actually doing is you are engaging in the pursuit of philosophy. And it is important for us as Christian disciples to love wisdom, because we have the mechanisms and we are hardwired to be people that display wisdom, that speak with wisdom, that live wisely in this world, and that are able to instruct the others in ways of wisdom and bring them to the foot of the cross to look and gaze at the beauty of wisdom personified, Jesus Christ himself. So philosophy has 4 different components. One is logic, some big words there, epistemology, metaphysics, and axiology. Okay, you don't have to worry about all of this yet. We're just doing an overview for us to be convinced that we Christians are to be in the space of thinking, and thinking logically, and thinking sharply, and thinking tightly, and thinking rightly, so that we will be able to process, the truths of what the Bible tells us, and we'll be able to take it and articulate it very effectively to the ones that we are pointing to, truth and wisdom personified, Jesus himself. So what is logic? Logic is that discipline of philosophy that helps us to spot error. Okay. Now, many times when we sit across the table and speak to a neighbor of a different faith, in the flow, they will say very many things, but many of those things would be erroneous. And a study of logic, the laws of thought, helps us to be able to spot errors in other people's presentation of their views. Okay. And epistemology is another branch of philosophy that helps us to study about knowledge. We say, I know this. This is common knowledge. Well, how do you know what you know? And what is knowledge fundamentally, right? And metaphysics is another branch of philosophy that helps us to study about reality at large and what really is real. Axiology is another branch that helps us to study and differentiate between good and wrong, right and wrong. So it finds application in the studies like ethics and so on. So what is philosophy? Philosophy is basically anybody's pursuit to love wisdom. And as a Christian, we have a greater responsibility in having at least a working knowledge to be able to think rightly about thinking itself. Okay, now let's quickly move to the next slide. When we speak about logical thinking, or when we speak about logic, or there are three laws of logic that Aristotle has given us. Now you might be wondering, well, Aristotle doesn't come in the Bible. He is not Christian. Why do I have to, listen and agree to what he said? And clearly it is unbiblical. No, he just actually discovered these. It's always been there. He's the one who discovers and synthesizes that this is the way we humans are wired to think, and this is the best way to think. And so the law of identity, law of non-contradiction, and law of excluded middle. Now, again, I'm not going to go into the details of all of this, but for our interest, I'm going to illustrate with a few examples what the law of non-contradiction is. Basically, what this means is nothing can be both this and that. Nothing can be both this and that in the same sense at the same time. So, for example, if I'm telling you Charles is teaching in this seminar, and at the same breath I'm saying Charles is not teaching in this seminar, it cannot both be true together in the same sense at the same time. Okay, if I were saying a statement like that, you would immediately say, Brother Charles, you are contradicting yourself. So that's the law of non-contradiction. When we think and speak and reason, we ought to think and speak and reason in ways that are not opposing each other, in non-contradictory ways. Okay, I'm going to give you a few examples. Can you move to slide 35, Brother Bishar? Skip a few slides. I'm just making up time. Keep moving. Yeah, keep moving. Move on. Move on. Right. Go back. Right. Consider these a few examples. Okay. I'm saying in the same breath, at the same time, in the same sense, the hen has two legs. The hen walks on all fours. Think about those two pairs of statements. Can both of them be true together? The hen has two legs. Yes. The hen walks on all fours. No. And if I again say the same Kiran, okay, I'm qualifying that Kiran. Kiran is a bachelor, and in the same breath, Kiran's wife is a teacher. Okay, again, those are two opposite statements. In the modern world, I understand that Kiran can be a bachelor and Kiran's quote unquote partner can be a teacher. All kinds of weird combinations can happen, but in an orthodox, normal way of understanding, these are opposing statements. Okay, let's move to the next slide. We have a few more easier examples there. Bicycles have one wheel. Is that possible? Uh, uh, the word bicycles having one wheel. It's contradictory, right? Raju is completely blind since birth. Raju saw the accident yesterday, the same Raju. No, he didn't lose his vision in the accident, okay? But these two are cannot be true together. Henry was in a round room. He kept going to the four corners of the room. So all that to say that the opposite statements cannot be true, and that is what the law of non-contradiction basically tries to teach us. Let's come to some application for us in our evangelism. Okay, next slide. Consider the statement: an atheist believes that there is no God. All of us know that. A Christian believes that there is a God. Okay, so can both of these be true together? Because they are opposite statements, and we saw through the law of non-contradictions that opposites cannot be true. It is illogical to assume that opposites are true and to argue that opposites are true. So an atheist believes that there is no God, a Christian believes that there is a God. So both of those cannot be true together. Either this is true or the other is true, right? So that's how we find application of logical thinking, especially the law of non-contradiction, in our conversational evangelism efforts. And so India is a country that is pluralistic, and we speak big about pluralism, and we make all the others that are exclusivistic look like people that are so narrow-minded. But actually, pluralism in religion, if we apply our reason, is not possible at all, because every religion says something that is totally opposite and contradictory to what the other religion says, right? So here's my last slide for you before we go into a time of Q&A. Think about these, and perhaps on the chat you can type. Can these two together be true? Does it make meaning? God is there and God is not there. No, they are opposite statements. The other statement is God is personal and God is impersonal. No, both of these cannot be true. Never use the word never. Okay, that's a self-defeating statement, because a person is already using the word never to say never use the word never. Then he who knows does not communicate, and he who communicates does not know. Again, contradictory, again, self-defeating. We cannot know anything about God. What do you think about that? That itself is knowledge about God, and therefore it is self-defeating. You would have heard this in young people would have heard this a lot from their parents. You're wrong to judge people who don't agree with your views. Now already they are passing judgment on somebody by saying this. So all this to say that our minds think non-contradictorily, and contradictory statements or opposite statements cannot be true at the same time in the same sense. So we as Christians who are made in the image and likeness of God are supposed to familiarize ourselves and see if the way we think is non-contradictory, and also spot contradictions in what others speak and tell us, especially in the context of evangelism. And that would be one of the ways of loving God with our mind, because we are wired with the ability to reason, because we were made with a God of reasons, right? And so logical thinking and faith, or reason and faith, or reason and revelation are not enemies, but they are actually friends that should complement each other. And we Christians should use it best to be able to present our arguments, our truths, our points of view in winsome ways, and share the beauty of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Okay? And if you want to know more about it, we will, in the next slide, explore more about this when you sign up for our residential level 2. we would take this several notches deeper. Until then, I want all of us to be thinking, to be asking, and to be answering. Thank you so much.